I inherited a lake and a lawsuit. Not exactly the solitude and fresh air retirement plan the brochure promised, but hey, at least the view was free. When my grandfather died, he left me a cabin on the edge of a crooked little lake, a place that smelled like damp pine and stubborn history, and I drove up there thinking I was rescuing peace of mind. What I brought back instead was a clipboard-bearing tyrant, an HOA, with delusions of empire, and a county courtroom that smelled like coffee and paper and judgment. The cabin looked like something the Reagan administration might have abandoned. Porch, leaning dock, missing teeth, solar panels that were mostly decorative. It was 36-year-old me, a real estate lawyer in a beige apartment in Dallas, trading migraine for rafter. I packed a toolbox, a cooler filled with grudging optimism, and showed up ready to fix what my grandfather left. That man loved his paperwork crates of deeds, permits, water use registrations stacked in the attic like relics. Reading them felt like piecing together the last good map I'd ever need. This property sat at the edge of Bluewood shores, picket fences, pastel kayaks, and people who smiled at you like they had a script to follow. My grandfather's land had been grandfathered out long before the developers finished painting the mailboxes, and his chain of title was tighter than most people's alibis. For a while I had this delicious quiet wind in the pines' loons calling across the water, silence heavy enough to make you forget that email exists. Then the neighborhood started treating my gravel like community parking. Kids fished off my dock. Teens turned the shoreline into Lover's Lane. Someone let a golden retriever pee on my canoe. At first I shrugged, let them think it's public, and that was my mistake. The traffic increased, the looks hardened, and the friendly wave turned into a cataloging glare that labeled me as a problem. An unsigned letter slid into my mailbox like a passive-aggressive ghost, ceased development until reviewed by the architectural committee. No letterhead, no signature, just the HOA acting like sheriff. Then a certified letter landed with a name, attached Karen Wells, president of Bluewood Shores, telling me to vacate. Karen arrived on my porch in perfectly pressed khakis, hair arranged like a helmet, clipboard in hand, smile nailed on conviction in the way someone who runs community bake sales thinks they run kingdoms. Her argument was simple and theatrical. The lake had always been used by the neighborhood, community traditions, and shared assets. This long-standing access, that as if memory and lemonade could turn private deeds into public rights. I told her calmly that the title said otherwise. The 1974 water registration said otherwise. My grandfather's notarized letter said otherwise. She blinked, laughed the laugh of someone hearing a joke they aren't supposed to laugh at, and called my quiet insistence hostility. Then came Bluewood Family Lake Day. A banner strung across my entrance, folding chairs scattered like confetti, a Bluetooth speaker blaring that upbeat country that pretends to be a mood. They'd thrown a party on my land without so much as an invite. I walked in, announced a trespass, and watched the picnic deflate into awkwardness. Karen raised a glass and told everyone we'd move next week, practiced comfort social script, engaged. The crowd left grumbling, and I printed notices, mailed certified revocations of presumed access, and put up 2 heavy metal signs: private property, no lake access, trespassers prosecuted. 3 days later, a man named Greg, mid-40s, tanned faux casual, came to the door claiming to be a board member. "Maybe we can work something out," he said, too friendly. I told him if Karen wanted a limited access agreement, she could put it in writing and mail it like an adult. He left with the kind of smile people wear before reporting you to a neighborhood gossip group. The next morning, my truck got a glossy flyer on the windshield: "Save our lake, a cherished Bluewood tradition is under threat." Below it, a photo of the lake, my lake, and an angry quote from Karen about outsiders and aggressive privatization. That word stung harder than I expected. They sued. Bluewood Shores filed for injunctive relief, claimed customary use and easement by necessity, and painted me as the villain who'd stolen the neighborhood coast. I didn't just file a response, I filed a counterclaim for trespass, unauthorized use, and retroactive fees for a decade of unpaid access calculated at municipal parking rates. I installed cameras, motion lights, and hired a forensic accountant to audit where residents' dues had been going. Courtrooms are theater rooms that smell like stale coffee and legal deodorant. I arrived with color-coded exhibits, plats, certified surveys, tax records, archival photos of my grandfather knee-deep in mud, holding a shovel, like a man who'd just finished building his kingdom. Karen arrived in ivory white with a lawyer who looked like he'd gotten his JD off a wine bottle label. Her opening was full of passion and no paperwork, tradition, community value. We all use it, rhetorical flourishes with nothing to bind them. Here's where things shifted the twist. A whistleblower from the HOA board sent me an internal email thread that said plainly, "We don't technically have recorded rights, but no one's challenged us in years. If we stay quiet, there's no need to stir things up." That admission, 3 years old, landed in court like an anchor. It was one thing to argue sentiment. It was another to prove the organization knowingly used its members' money and pretended rights existed. More evidence surfaced: security footage of Karen's own brother hauling lawn furniture across my dock while whistling and sipping a White Claw, photos of HOA volunteers erecting Blue Wood Shores Recreation Zone signs on my shoreline line items in HOA budgets labeled shoreline maintenance and parking lot resurfacing. The forensic accountant walked the gallery through months of expenditures for land they did not own and events they held on private property. The judge's face tightened, the way someone's face tightens when reality snaps into focus. Sentiment is sentimental, but property law runs on paper. Trial day was slow drumbeats, neighbors in the gallery, local reporters sharpening pencils. I presented my geodetic survey, the 1974 certified water registration notary letters from my grandfather that read bluntly, "If someone wants to use my land, they better bring a deed, not a smile." The judge asked for specifics. The HOA's counsel produced witness statements and memories, and the courtroom slowly rearranged itself around facts. The verdict felt like an audible exhale. The judge ruled for me. Title confirmed, HOA, claims dismissed, and she awarded damages for unauthorized use plus a civil penalty for misrepresenting property status to members. The gavel landed like thunder. Karen left the courthouse as if she'd misplaced the ground under her feet. The aftermath unfolded in the HOA clubhouse, a packed emergency meeting, internal emails read aloud, residents learning they'd been paying for an illusion, and then Karen was voted out by the very people she'd been persuading to follow her lead. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I sat on my dock and watched the water turn glass silver at dusk, listened to the old wood creak under my boots, and thought about my grandfather. He read property law the way other men read the comics, for relaxation and for survival. His stacks of documents weren't eccentric clutter, they were a kind of armor. He didn't trust people blindly. Now I understood why. The lesson is blunt, and practical rights that aren't written are easy to borrow and hard to take back. Communities fill legal gaps with stories and feeling, and sometimes those stories let a neighborhood treat someone else's land as theirs for a weekend. But when sentiment collides with a chain of title deeds, usually win if you're willing to show them line by stubborn line. I put up clearer, legally precise signs, dull and contractual, the kind that read like clauses instead of threats. I set up a modest permit system for temporary access. Affordable, revocable, no parties, no music after 8, no HOA-affiliated events. And I filed the land records in an accessible public registry so no one could mistake memory for legal fact again. A few neighbors thanked me quietly. Not everyone loved Karen's grip. Some admitted they'd suspected for years the lake wasn't technically theirs, but were too afraid to rock the boat. The satisfying part, the part that tastes like justice rather than revenge, was watching the organization that had built power on presumption face the consequences of misrepresentation. The HOA paid fines, reorganized under humbled leadership, and for a while the pastel kayaks stayed in people's garages. So here's the question I'd toss out to you. Stick a pin in your conscience for a second when a community's tradition sits on someone else's deed. Is it compassion to demand access, or entitlement dressed up as nostalgia? Who decides where kindness ends and theft begins? If you've been on either side of this line, stood your ground, or felt asked to give something you believed you had a right to tell us, drop your story below, argue your take on justice versus kindness, and let people decide. If this landed with you, like, comment who was right, who was wrong, and if you've got a similar tale, share how it ended. I still come up most weekends, sometimes to fish, sometimes to read, mostly to listen to the old dock sigh under my boots, and to know that some things are worth defending even when the price is a courtroom and a clipboard.